Bonjour, je m'appelle Amanda Norris, aussi Penelope Christophine. C'est nom de plume. This video is an homage. That's a French and an English word. I think that's called a gramophone or something. What is that word for when a language there's overlap, they cross over, and anyway. I said I was going to do a reading for Alice Capelle because she had a chat with Municat on Municat's members only section. So, that's what I'm doing this afternoon. I'm dressed like this because these are my work clothes. I enjoy Alice Capelle's content because she is a very keen observer of class issues and also because she is French. She is the author of Collapse Feminism. I will put a link in the description. I am the author of this book, Strange Fire in a Vacuum, Understanding the Social Epidemic of Mass Shootings in America. It is self-published. It is written entirely by myself. And I recommend that you get the second edition because the first edition on Kindle does not have page numbers because I did not know how to do that when I uploaded it to Kindle. So, without saying much more about the book, what do I want to tell Alice Capelle? Hi, nice to meet you. I'm American. I took French for 15 years in this school system, both private and public, so I can't speak a lick of it. However, I am going to read this passage to you, and then I'm going to attempt to read it in French using Google Translate because I have been told that I was told when I was 12 that I had really good pronunciation. I always think if you're going to pay respect to somebody, you should try to address them in their native language. You know that Americans get slammed for going around the world and being rude and loud and trying to get people to speak English to them and speaking louder when they just don't understand. That doesn't work. Don't do that. Anyway, how did this particular section that I'm going to read to you come about? I was dating a man named Robert Farley, who has a PhD in international relations and teaches intelligence courses at the Patterson School of Diplomacy in Kentucky. But he came here, he had a temporary appointment to the U.S. Army War College, which is located in this town that I've been living for several years. And I love it. Even though I'm gonna have to flee now because fuck this Pakistocracy. But the U.S. Army War College culls top military talent from around the world. So the cohorts of students comprise high-level military personnel from the US, but also from around the world. So, France, Saudi Arabia, our allies, basically. And part of professor duties at this college are that they are supposed to bond pretty tightly with their students, and the students have a lot of social functions that are actually mandatory, like baseball games, happy hour, holiday parties. There's a lot of networking. And so that was great fun for me to date this professor because I got to go to these social functions with him and meet a lot of his students. And I would otherwise not get to do that because the military kind of it's kind of a closed, there's this divide. And so we were at a Christmas party that was hosted by I want to say Pierre and Marie. I don't know. I could be making that up because Marie is such a common French name. But the French couple, and they were they threw this lovely holiday party. It was very French, and the food was fantastic. And um, they opened their party with a skit. And they came out and they were wearing yellow vests like I'm wearing now. This is one that I use every day at my job at the warehouse. And they said, "Hello, bonjour, we are the Gilet Jeunes, and we are angry, and we do not know what we are angry about, but we are angry." And that it was funny. It was funny, but I didn't know what they were referring to because I hadn't been following the coverage of the Gilet Jeunes. And everybody laughed, you know. And so, like, I had a great time. And later, when I was doing research or just on my own, I looked up, what is this Gilet Jaune? Right? And I looked it up and I said, "Oh my God, Rob, this is like the French people are having their Occupy Wall Street." And he was like, "No, I don't know. I don't see it that way because this is right wing." And I was like, "No, it's just like Occupy." And so we had a back and forth. And then I just remembered his comment, and it stuck out to me. They don't know what they're angry about. And I was watching footage of, well, French people, they can see their breath in their apartment because they had to choose between fuel and eating food. The Gilets Jaunes protest was touched off when I believe it was Macron attempted to implement a new tax on gasoline, and the working class French people stood up and called it the straw that broke the camel's back. I'm going to take this off now. I sometimes ride my bike to work. That's another thing I admire about Europeans. They don't think that's odd. Everyone here thinks that's odd of me. Good God. It's only 2.6 miles, so whatever. But I'm looking at these people and their protests, and I'm like, I don't know. It seems like they're being they have some pretty specific complaints to me. I think they know quite well what they're angry about. They're angry they're poor. They're angry because they're poor. But this is difficult for people who are not poor to understand, especially difficult for people who, I don't know, have achieved such status within the French military or the US military that their job is to liaise with people, politicians in power, and occupy this sort of rarefied space of privilege. So, of course, this just looks, I guess, confusing to them. I don't know. So, anyway, I also want to say that the Gilets Jaunes protests might kind of blur together, and they blur together in my mind, and might blur together in other Americans' minds if you haven't been following. I don't follow other countries' politics nearly as well as I should, but it might blur together with, I guess, the looting and the violence and the extreme general strike protest of more recent times when, was it Marie Le Pen? We don't know who decided to extend the retirement age of the French people, and the government decided they're going to push it up 2 years, and the French people were like, no, the fuck, you're not. And most of my American friends and I, we're pretty well politically aligned, and the ones who are savvy and follow this stuff, they're like, why can't we be more like the French people? Right? I mean, they don't fuck around, man. You try to take their vacation, they'll burn your fucking house down. I'm like, yeah, we need some more of that. We need some of that energy up in here. Up in this bitch. Okay, so I'm gonna read now from Strange Fire in a Vacuum. If you get this book, if you like this passage, I should take my safety glasses off. This is from chapter 6, page 65. Class issues. Rage and shame as twin and primal emotional root causes and catalysts. More relevant to me than debating the scientific legitimacy of spectrum disorders The book discusses our mental health care system and critiques it a lot, is the idea that cultural trends are triggering new diagnostic criteria in a sensitized, economically stressed out, and post-industrial population. How many of these negative behaviors, which may be folded into diagnostic umbrellas, have also been identified by writers tracking the downward spiral and radicalization of white, working-class, Rust Belt types since the 2016 rise of Trump and the alt-right. Quote, "It was a story of unfairness and anxiety, frustration and slippage. A story in which shame was the companion to need," writes Mother Jones correspondent Arlie Hustle Hochschild of Red States, which carried Trump to power. Rage and shame are obverses. Rage is the hot, molten version of its cooler, carcinogenic twin, shame. Rage is what happens when the shame gets turned inside out and erupts, finding external targets instead of eating a person from within. Unsurprisingly, the narrative of descent into alt-right cuckoo babble of red states, such as West Virginia and Louisiana, coalesces around the failure of industrialization to bring happiness to these regions, and again, it is something which the Unabomber Manifesto gives startling and oracular voice to. Okay, so in this book, I use two sources to explain mass shooters, the Unabomber Manifesto and Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning. I use the Unabomber Manifesto because it has a lot to say that overlaps with Frankl, but it was written by a man who committed criminal acts of terrorism, and it is the darker version of the two sources. I believed him to be the prototype of mass shooters. Okay, like a forerunner, precursor person. Okay. Kaczynski was a radical Luddite and an armchair sociologist. Like, I am an armchair forensic psychologist. His interest and his lens were therefore more philosophical than political science oriented, so the particulars of an alt-right proto-fascist movement escaped his predictive analysis. However, the Unabomber attempted to posit a revolutionary solution to what ails mankind. He was fundamentally an anarchist. Most mass shootings are, on some level, anarchistic acts. Kaczynski even went so far as to caution his imagined adherents and audience in posterity against political reaction formation. Lodging protests through political channels would miss the boat, in Kaczynski's mind, because it would misidentify and sublimate a more valid reaction to the root causes of the disgruntled modern man's psychic pain. Here I quote from the manifesto. 4. "We therefore advocate a revolution against the industrial system. This revolution may or may not make use of violence. It may be sudden or it may be a relatively gradual process spanning a few decades. We can't predict any of that, but we do outline in a very general way the measures that those who hate the industrial system should take in order to prepare the way for a revolution against that form of society. This is not to be a political revolution. Its object will be to overthrow not governments but the economic and technological basis of the present society. I cannot help but point out that the skyrocketing incidence of mass shootings, with epic rates for the last 3 years. This book was published in 2020. I started making notes for it in 2017. I think I finished it in 2019 or 2018. I can't really remember. Is also concurrent with the occupying of high office by Donald Trump, a virulent populist demagogue who did everything he could to first stoke, then capture the rage against the machine underclass resentment of his working class followers, many of whom appear to suffer from myriad delusions and symptoms on Kaczynski's maladjustment list. Mass shootings occurred with alarming frequency during Barack Obama's time in office too, but not with this almost mind-numbing regularity. We can only hope that in 2019 we saw the peak of the activity. Okay, so I guess it's finishing writing in 2019. Almost 10 years ago, Occupy Wall Street protesters sought redress of economic injustice through political reforms within the United States. If Kaczynski's thesis holds true, the violent unrest and the cascade of social ills in his manifesto should be international. If the problems are truly economic and technological and not political, they will eventually affect every developed nation. In 2018, I saw in the Gilet Jeunes protests in France a strain of economic grievance and underclass resentment, akin to the Occupy Wall Street movement of 2011 and 2012 in the United States. Interestingly, commentators reacting to the Gilet Jeunes commonly mock them as being angry, but not knowing what they were angry about. This is a peculiar form of condescension often leveled at the working class by middle and upper class observers. This condescension was also part of the domestic press reaction to Occupy Wall Street and later to Black Lives Matter. I remember watching CNN's Aaron Burnett interject useless, dumbfounded comments such as the following. One must ask what those rioters have to gain from setting a local CVS on fire in their own neighborhood. As Baltimore protests following the funeral of Freddie Gray escalated into looting and arson in April 2015. Gray died after sustaining traumatic brain injuries while in police custody. His death was construed as police brutality. What these tone-deaf and class-insensitive commentators magnify is the degree to which underclass rage often does not explicitly announce or streamline itself with identifiable targets. Burnett failed to realize that no one in the ghetto has this sense of ownership or investment in their physical surroundings, and this lack of identification and investment is not at all irrational. And before anyone jumps on me for being a quote-unquote hypocrite, I lived in the ghetto. I lived in Norristown, Pennsylvania for 3 years. I lived in a boarding house room. So I very much was picking up on this tone-deafness from my boarding house room where I had to share a bathroom with 5 other transients and sometimes criminals and did not even have a stove. Okay. One of the consequences of severe economic inequality is this ghettoization surrounding urban centers, resulting in patches of blighted geography in which residents feel desperate at worst and apathetic at best. Neighborhoods so grim, violent, tense, and overcrowded that the people living there do not feel they live there by choice, but rather as a last resort against homelessness. Residents survive by largely detaching from their surroundings. They reduce their lives to work-related comings and goings and do not try to interact with their neighbors in any meaningful way. Geographical proximity, therefore, is not community in the sense that Burnett was invoking with their own neighborhood. It was no more their neighborhood than CVS was their community-based business. It's not. It's a fucking corporation. Enraged people don't speak in bullet points. They do not view themselves as stakeholders, but rather as the people left holding the bag when society collapses. It is a flaw in the interpretive powers of the mass media not to properly contextualize this amorphous, inarticulate aspect of class violence, but to denigrate and exaggerate it, intentionally or inadvertently. This disconnect is also another stumbling block for activists with a legitimate set of concerns as they get drowned out in the noise of misinterpretation. I was in Occupy. I was in 2 chapters of Occupy. I was in Occupy Shoreline in Connecticut. My job was to liaise with Occupy New Haven because I was 31, 32 at the time, and Occupy Shoreline had much older people in it, and they thought I could relate to the New Haven, the people at the Yale Quad. Anyway, back to the text. Page 69. I see a corollary here in the adamant refusal to really examine mass shooters who are both more expressive and self-consciously articulate in the lead up to their killings than other felony killers, or than looters or punk arsonists. In spite of their ramblings on social media, and in spite of many of them leaving lengthy manifestos, they are labeled senseless. Hence, the media stifles any real philosophical investigative inquiry. They are, like the host of OWS, Gilet Jeunes, and Black Bloc anarchists, perhaps as much operating without a full picture of how their motives relate to the international political and economic sphere. All underclass rage is subject to unconscious or subconscious distortions from both the actors themselves and the observers. But these underclass rioters are not senseless in the sense that we can neither learn anything from what they are saying or doing, nor learn from what their behavior teaches us about the global systemic context in which they operate. It is not true that protesters such as the Gilet Jeunes or Occupy Wall Streeters did not know what they were angry about. They really wanted one thing: economic security. That is, money. But money yesterday when it could have really made a difference in their lives. Mass shooters appear to mystify us because those who don't leave extensive manifestos usually offer no clue as to what they wanted. They want one thing, too: power, specifically in the form of social status, but yesterday, when it could have really mattered in their lives, i.e., gotten them that job, gotten them that girl, and so on and so forth. They want to be alphas, but they are usually betas who can't own up to their beta status as being deserved or real. Perhaps this is why in an event such as a job loss or a romantic breakup can be so powerful as a trigger, because it emphasizes that intolerable beta status. We think mass shooters did not want anything but to kill, but this is because we have too long viewed this activity under a headline-spun spell of reductivity. Quote, another senseless killing. This is why I felt that I had to write the book. I felt that the coverage of the mass shooting phenomenon wasn't getting deep enough. In fact, before they killed, mass shooters wanted many other things. They wanted power, freedom, and exalted status, success, and fulfillment. They wanted these things because they have failed, fundamentally, to conceptualize any meaning beyond the desires of their egos. And I guess Alice might add that this is capitalist. This is a capitalist phenomenon, right? This capitalist realism. I don't know too much. I appreciated her for the capitalist realism versus capitalist mysticism video, and also the fame is abuse that she did. Okay. I will link in the description. Back to the text. This lack of meaning is not a delusion entirely of their own making, for they inhabit a culture that increasingly does not really offer alternative existential goals beyond economic power and social status as a means to fulfillment. There really should not even be any discourse about alphas and betas. The denigration of the common man and his seduction into self-loathing by capitalist purveyors of mass culture is a major cause of so-called deaths of despair. Popular culture promotes unrealistic ideals of financial success and status, ideals that increasingly are at odds with economic reality. Mass shooters did not kill prior to their mass shootings because they were too busy striving for and failing to obtain these often unattainable and unrealistic external measures of success and fulfillment. The killing ultimately becomes secondary to the double acts of suicide and social protest, and the homicides are not even a truly motivating factor. We have rarely seen a case of a serial killer, someone who truly gets gratification and enjoyment from the act of killing itself, suddenly chucking his methodical, secretive ways and turning into a mass shooter. Mass shooters have never committed a homicide. Most mass shooters have never committed a homicide before and are not really gratified in the same way by the act of killing. Weird. So I ended that on page 70. Now, now comes the comic relief portion of the video. Hmm. Oh wait. Oh, here it is. Now, Google Translate, thankfully for y'all, will only allow me to translate the first, like, I don't know, 5,000 words. I don't think I even read that many. But anyway. Oh, God. My God. Escapes me. We watched Julie and Julia last night. I had seen it. My boyfriend hadn't. I love this chick, Simka. Je m'appelle Simka. Okay. Questions de classe. La rage et la honte. Causes et catalyseurs émotionnels fondamentaux et jumeaux. I have no idea what I'm saying. Okay. This is fun. Plus pertinent et meilleur que le débat sur la légitimité scientifique des troubles du spectre autistique et l'idée que les tendances culturelles sous-tendent de nouveaux critères diagnostiques au sein d'une population sensibilisée, économiquement stressée et post-industrielle. Combien de ces comportements négatifs qui pourraient être regroupés sous des appellations génériques ont également été identifiés par les auteurs qui, suivant le spirale descendant et la radicalisation de la classe ouvrière blanche, notamment de la Rust Belt, depuis l'arrivée de Trump et de l'alt-right en 2016. Quote. C'était une histoire d'injustice, d'anxiété, de frustration et de dérapage. Une histoire où l'on était le compagnon indispensable, écrit Harley Hassel Hochschild, correspondante de Mother Jones sur les États républicains qui ont porté Trump au pouvoir. La rage et la honte sont des opposés. La rage est la version brûlante et influente de sa jumelle plus fort et cancérigène. La honte. La rage survient lorsque la honte se retourne et éclate, trouvant des cibles externes au lieu de ronger en passant de l'intérieur. Sans surprise, la recette de la descente au enfer de l'alt-right dans des États républicains comme la Virginie occidentale, West Virginia, et la Louisiane s'articule autour de l'échec de l'industrialisation à apporter le bonheur à ces régions. Et, là encore, le manifeste de Unabomber y apporte une voix saisissante et prémonitoire. Kaczynski était un ludite radical et un sociologue de salon. Son intérêt et son regard étant donc plus philosophique que politologue, si bien que la spécificité d'un mouvement proto-fasciste d'alt-right échappant à son analyse prédictive. Cependant, une bomber tentait de proposer une solution révolutionnaire au mot de la humanité. Il était fondamentalement anarchiste. La plupart des fusillades des maçons à un certain niveau des actes anarchistes. Kaczynski et même à je crois mettre en garde ses partisans imaginaires et son peuple contre toute formation politique réactionnaire. Pour Kaczynski, protester à la voie politique serait manquer le coche, car cela reviendrait à mal identifier et à sublimer une réaction plus pertinente aux causes profondes de la souffrance psychique de l'homme moderne mécontent. Well, that is really all I have the energy for today. Thank you so much, Alice Capelle. Thank you so much, Mooney Cat. Over and out.